If, like me, you've binged through the Sharpe series time and time again, you'll notice that one episode stands out like a sore thumb. That episode is Sharpe Gold. It's the one where suddenly the gritty Napoleonic war story turns into a treasure hunting adventure, complete with lost Aztec gold, mysterious tribes, and a tone that feels more like Indiana Jones. But why is it so different from the rest of the series? Why did it drift so far from Bernard Cornwell's original story? And what really went on behind the scenes of this strange detour into historical fantasy? Well, let's find out. By the time Sharpe Gold aired in 1995, the series had already built a reputation for being pretty authentic to the time period. Sean Bean Sharpe was a hero, rising through the ranks of Wellington's army. But he wasn't your typical protagonist. He was much more morally complex, yet he still carried characteristics needed to be a leading man. The early episodes had everything you would want from a Napoleonic era drama. Now, I'm certainly not saying they're all perfect, but they felt real, and had a lot of heart that made you invested in the journey of Richard Sharpe. So when Sharpe Gold was released, it certainly was a rather long leap from what we were used to, and what we expect from a Sharpe episode. Firstly, let's take a look at the novel version of Sharpe Gold, and see what should have happened. The story is set in the summer of 1810. The Peninsular War is raging and Wellington's army is running out of money. To keep the campaign alive, he sends Richard Sharpe on a secret mission to recover a hoard of Spanish gold hidden behind French lines. The treasure is guarded by a brutal guerrilla leader, El Catalico, who trusts no one and delights in torturing prisoners. The British army have already lost men trying to retrieve the gold, including Claude Hardy, an exploring officer and former lover of Sharpe's old flame, Josefina Lacosta. Sharpe sets out with his riflemen under Major Kearsey, who insists the mission is to return the gold to the Spanish, rather than seize it. When Kearsey is captured, Sharpe rescues him and frees a certain Teresa Marino and her brother Ramon, children of a rather important partisan. Teresa, we find out, is betrothed to El Catalico. However, her and Sharpe soon discover some feelings for each other. El Catalico claims the French have already taken the treasure and killed Hardy, but Sharpe's instincts say otherwise. Doubling back to investigate a grave, he discovers the gold hidden in a manure pile. Trapped by El Catalico's men, Sharpe takes Teresa hostage and escapes with both her and the treasure. Pursued by French troops and furious partisans, Sharpe heads for Almeida, a fortress about to be besieged by the French. Along the way, Teresa admits that El Catalico murdered Hardy and planned to use the gold for his own power. And after being saved from French lancers by Captain Lassalle and his King's German Legion, Sharpe reaches Almeida, where Brigadier Cox refuses to believe his story. El Catalico arrives claiming to represent the Spanish government, and Cox orders him to surrender the gold to El Catalico. That night, El Catalico attacks. In a desperate rooftop duel, Sharpe lets himself be stabbed through the leg, trapping the Spaniard's sword before killing him. When Cox insists on handing over the gold, Sharpe prepares to destroy the fortress's magazine, but a French shell ignites it first, obliterating Almeida and killing hundreds, including Kearsey. Sharpe escapes with his men, the gold and his honour intact. Teresa returns to lead the guerrillas, while Sharpe delivers most of the treasure to Wellington, who reveals it will fund the lines of Torre Vedras, the defence that will save Lisbon. At the end, Sharpe is granted a month's leave. Therefore, he visits Josefina Lacosta in Lisbon, hoping for a rather entertaining time. When she complains about losing a wealthy client because of Sharpe, he tosses her a few coins and has a little laugh. Proof that he still has a little of Sharpe's gold left to spend. Now, as you can see, this is rather different to what we got in the TV adaptation, and what should have been a far superior story. In fact, only 2 small scenes at the beginning of the TV adaptation were borrowed from the books, with the addition of the gold and Spanish guerrillas, which are also common elements. One thing to note before we look at the changes to the story is that according to Jason Salke, who plays Harris, a lot of the changes unfortunately come down to the injury to Paul McGann, who was Sharpe before Sean Bean. When McGann got injured playing football, and Sharpe was recast with Sean Bean, when they had to go back to rewrite and reshoot the episode, they couldn't use the original script, because if they did, they would have had to pay the old cast and crew, which I believe was due to union rules. Now, as we all know, Sharpe's budget wasn't large, so to pay the previous cast and crew would have hit them quite hard. This meant the writers had to come up with a new storyline, which is what we ended up seeing. Certainly, this wasn't the best situation to be in, and for that, I will give the episode a small break. However, I do believe they could have created something a little bit closer to what Sharpe represents. Screenwriter Nigel Neal said of his adaptation of Bernard Cornwell's novel, "I didn't use much of the book. I used the first 10 pages, I think. Then I had an idea which would have been more fun to do. It was all about magic by the time I was through with it." So then what did we get from Nigel Neal? Well, the basic plot was that it was set in 1813 instead, and as Wellington prepares to invade France, Sharpe lands in trouble after failing to save a rifleman from execution for stealing a chicken. Forced by Wellington to apologise to Lieutenant Ayres, Sharpe soon finds himself saddled with him on a mission to trade rifles for captured deserters held by the ruthless guerrilla El Casco. Meanwhile, Bess Nugent and her daughter Ellie arrive from Ireland searching for Bess's missing husband, Will Nugent. Despite Wellington's refusal to help, they join Sharpe's detachment, and Ellie forms a growing bond with him. After a small skirmish with French cavalry, Ellie is shaken by having to kill a young soldier, although not too shaken to have a little bit of fun with Sharpe. The exchange with El Casco goes ahead, but when Ellie discovers a clue to her father's whereabouts, she and her mother ride off, forcing Sharpe to pursue them. Captured by El Casco's men, Bess is killed and Ellie imprisoned in a mountain cave where she finds her deranged father. With help from French Lieutenant Barbier, Sharpe attacks the guerrilla's hideout to rescue Ellie and her father. During the commotion, El Casco kills Ayres and wounds Sharpe before being shot dead by Sergeant Harper. In the aftermath, Sharpe blows up the guerrilla's hideout and retrieves some of the stolen gold. Will Nugent regains his sanity and thanks Sharpe for saving them both. And as Wellington says,
"It's what he does, isn't it, Sharpe?"
Now, the only part of the movie present that was taken from the original novel is that one of Sharpe's riflemen, Skillicorn in this instance, was caught stealing a chicken by a group of provosts. Now, while the rifleman was hanged in the movie, in the novel, he just simply gets a beating from Sharpe. We also get the Wellington family storyline, which for me is rather bizarre. The whole idea of 2 women travelling around in what is essentially a war zone unmolested, whilst also knowing where Wellington is camped, is rather outlandish. It also does baffle me when they demand Wellington send out soldiers to find Will Nugent. This is the same Wellington who, let's not forget, is in the middle of trying to win a war against Napoleon, and already has scarce resources. And obviously he would say no. I think it's quite fair to say that one man's worth isn't worth an entire campaign. And probably the only people in Sharpe's universe worthy of sending soldiers out for a rescue mission would probably be Wellington himself, or another high-ranking military officer. And as Will Nugent doesn't possess such credentials, it seems fair that the request is denied. It does amaze me as well how hysterical she gets towards Wellington. The lack of respect towards him just wouldn't be done in that time period, regardless of familial bonds. And I think of the 2, Ellie is probably the most compelling character. She at least has decent background development and screen time, and it's fair to say that her and Sharpe do actually have a bit of chemistry. She is quite tomboyish, so it does work a bit. I also did like the shooting contest between her and Sharpe. I thought it worked and added a bit of levity to the episode, as well as enabling us to see Ellie being somewhat competent in the field, which we do see later. Although a point of utter bewilderment for me is when Ellie saves Lieutenant Ayres from the French ambush, and she is in a lot of shock to what she did. Why then did they have Sharpe get busy with her in the bushes? Now I know Sharpe is a ladies' man and won't say no to a bit of fun, but in the bushes? Near her mother and her rifleman? Yeah, that just didn't work for me. We also get the change of character, El Catolico to El Casco, a man who likes to meow at women. I'll say this for the actor, he certainly worked with what he was given, and if the script was better, he could have been a compelling villain. He was intense, brooding, and had aura, which I can appreciate. Although his death scene does make me laugh. It just feels like someone found the slow motion setting on a camera and decided, ooh, this will be fun. And while I'm on with him, for me the tiki dolls they use as the Aztec idols are absolute crap, and the conquistador armour worn by El Casco and his men are budget to say the least, and not at all authentic. His death, with Harper killing him instead of Sharpe, was also a bit off for me. Now, yes, it does insert the idea that Harper has and always will be looking out for Sharpe, almost like his guardian angel, but I think having Sharpe do the killing would have made more sense in how the story developed. He did it in the books, and yes, I know they couldn't use everything, but I think this just would have been better. The Teresa element is also interesting. Now in the novel, she makes her debut here, yet by this point, Sharpe has already met her, bedded her, and buried her, hence I suppose the Ellie Nugent factor. I can kind of forgive this change, as they had to really redo a lot of storylines throughout the series because of the Paul McGann injury. In an alternative universe, I would have loved to have seen how the show would have been done if McGann wasn't injured. This is also the last we see of Rifleman Cooper. Now we don't get a reason in the show why he's no longer there, but when I was doing my research, I found that during filming in Crimea, the production was hit by a severe drought, leaving the cast and crew with barely enough water to get by. Apparently each person was rationed to just 1 litre of water a day, and with temperatures soaring above 32 degrees Celsius, tempers inevitably began to fray. John Tams, who plays Hagman, became so exhausted and frustrated that he tried to resign, but the producers refused his request and instead sent him home for 2 weeks to recover. Sean Bean and Dara Marley, however, were given a few extra comforts to help them cope with the conditions, though not everyone was so fortunate. Michael Mears, who plays Cooper, clashed with the producers after being denied water on set, leading to a rather heated argument back at the hotel. And despite O'Malley's attempt to calm things down, Mears was dismissed once filming concluded, which explains why his character never appears again in the Sharpe series. Interestingly, when looking into the production history, this period in Crimea is frequently cited as one of the toughest shoots the Sharpe crew ever endured. Another interesting element in the show I noticed was how they treated the prisoners. At the start of the episode, they hang Skillicorn for taking a chicken, which you can kind of understand with the laws of the army, especially if you're trying to drum up support in the local areas. However, with the deserters that they swap for rifles, they elect to reintroduce them into the army, offering clemency rather than the noose. Now, personally for me, I think deserting is a much larger crime, as we saw in Sharpe's enemy with Hageswell. Those that desert can potentially end up being a larger issue. Wellington essentially saves them so he's enough bodies to throw out the French, although I would wager the kill count and value of a crack-shot rifleman should mean more than the standard redcoat, but I suppose this was a gamble Wellington was willing to risk. All in all though, I think the cast do their best to elevate a weak script, and their performances make the story far more watchable than it has any right to be. The real strength lies in the dynamic between Sharpe and Ayres. What begins as open hostility gradually turns into grudging respect, as the two men are forced to rely on one another and come to see past their first impressions. It's a believable, well-played evolution that adds some much-needed depth. Ian Shaw, who plays Ayres, holds his own alongside Sean Bean, and preventing him from becoming just another stiff, one-dimensional officer in need of Sharpe's guidance. So I think this is a plus for the episode. The ending, with Sharpe giving 1 bag of gold to Wellington and Monroe, was interesting. It did feel like there was more gold in the guerrilla tunnels than 1 bag, although this could be a wink and nod at the novel version, where he takes some of the gold for himself and his men. I would also assume that they should have taken all the gold before blowing the tunnels, otherwise it would have been a waste. Yes, this episode was disappointing. Now of course changes were needed to be made because of the circumstances, not within their control. But I feel the script could have been kept at least near to what was written by Bernard Cornwell, and faithful to the tone of the Sharpe episodes we saw previously. The episode takes to silly points that make no narrative or thematic sense. The heart of the show has always been a kind of grit and camaraderie set in a grounded military drama. This episode trades all that for treasure hunting cliches, muddled writing, and a tone so far removed from the rest of the series it might as well be fan fiction. Now maybe I am being a little harsh because my standards for Sharpe are so high, but at least I am comforted to know that this was Bernard Cornwell and Sean Bean's least favourite episode as well. And it's certainly not the cast's fault. They do their best with what they've got, but no amount of strong acting can save a script that doesn't really know what story it wants to tell. Still, every series has its missteps, and if nothing else, Sharpe Gold showed the producers exactly what not to do, because after this detour, the show went back to doing what it does best. Battles, brotherhood, and a bit of British grit. Thanks for watching this video. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on Sharpe Gold as an episode. How would you have made this story work? Or do you completely disagree with me and really liked it? Please do like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification button to keep up to date with my latest videos. Thanks again, and I'll see you over the hills and far away.